If the lights go down, you may be able to see the beauty and color. In 1875, an amateur archaeologist in Spain took his 9-year-old daughter with him that day into a cave. He had been looking for artifacts from perhaps as far back as the Ice Age. And he was looking around, and as he was looking, his 9-year-old daughter said, "Look, Papa, oxen." She had made one of the greatest discoveries of all time. This goes back 35,000 years. It's one of the greatest findings of all time. And here this man for 4 years had been looking for some kind of find, some kind of artifact. But he forgot to do one thing. His daughter did it. He forgot to do one thing. He forgot to look up. And when he looked up, isn't that magnificent? 35,000 years ago. We'll have the lights back on. And so Jesus says in this gospel reading from Luke today, stand up and raise your heads, for your redemption is near. Advent is the season where we are invited to stand and raise our heads and look up so that we won't miss the wonder, the magnificent, great things. Great things are happening. And we are called in Advent to be a part of this great thing that God is doing and is about. And Advent, the whole part of Advent, at least the first Sunday of Advent, is to give us this sense of urgency. This sense of, this is what we must do now. This is not a time to say, okay, I will wait until I finish this project. No, you can't wait till you finish this project, because when you finish this project, you will go to another project. Advent calls us to stop what we're doing, to look up, and to see what God is about, and there's an urgency. Do it today. Do it now. Do it at this very moment. Lift up, stand up, lift up your heads, and see that your redemption is drawing near. That's part of what apocalyptic literature in the Bible is all about. We read this morning Luke 21, which is called the Little Apocalypse. Have you ever heard that word before? In the New Testament, the whole book of Revelation is an apocalypse. Actually, if you read it from the Greek, it would say the apocalypse to John. The revelation to John. Apocalypse means to unveil, to show. And so there are parts of the Old Testament, parts of the Gospels, the whole book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. These are apocalyptic writings. These are things that open up, that unveil, that show us what cannot ordinarily be seen. And we see the great glory of God when the unveiling happens. Apocalypse also brings a sense of dire warning, because it helps us to see that whatever time that we're in is an urgent time. It's a time that God is calling us, and calling us now, calling us this day, calling us where we are and at the moment in which we live. And so we have this picture here and the little apocalypse in Luke 21, where the sun and the moon are signs, and the shaking of the skies and the roaring of the seas, and the people on earth fainting in fear. And all of these things are happening at once. And then it says that the Son of Man in a cloud will appear in power and great glory. If this isn't getting your attention, folks, you're not listening here this morning. We're talking about an unveiling. We're looking at the greatest thing that will ever happen. This is the mighty work of God. And so we get to see it, the unveiling, the end of time, the end of history, the end of all human endeavor. It happens in this thing called the second coming of Jesus Christ. And the first Sunday of Advent, believe it or not, begins there with this ending. We are to see how the story finishes, what the end looks like, and to hear Jesus' invitation: stand up when these things happen. Raise your heads. Your redemption is drawing nigh. Now, we live in an apocalyptic time, don't we? Actually, if we would understand what's going on here, this little apocalypse is compressing time so that it all comes together in the moment of now. The past and the present is all converging and compressing into this very moment, and the apocalyptic moment is not somewhere down there, someplace to come. It's this very moment right now. This is our apocalyptic moment. This is our eternal now. This is the time in which God is doing great things. Stand up and raise your heads. Well, that's a great invitation for the day in which we live, because indeed this is, and every age has been, an apocalyptic time. Nations at war against nations. Apocalyptic time. Stand up and raise your heads. The seas roaring, the fires burning, the earthquakes happening, and the invitation for us: stand up and raise your heads. And this earth so fragile now because of the way that we have lived in it. For 65 million years, this earth has been evolving and moving and adapting and changing to all these beautiful and wonderful forms of life that sustain us on this planet. And in our own day, in this generation, we see that the world is collapsing. The earth is suffocating and choking. That species of life that have been here for millions of years are no longer able to thrive and live on this world. And now we don't know how long it's going to be in which we may not be able to live on this planet because of what we have done to this fragile, beautiful place that God has given to us. It's an apocalyptic time, if there ever was one. Stand up and lift up your heads. Jesus invites us. apocalyptic time gives us an opportunity to begin again. The first Sunday of Advent, calling us to begin again. Isn't that a wonderful thing to contemplate? Regardless of where we've been and what we've done and what has happened to us, Advent says we can begin again. We can have a fresh start. We can have a new beginning. God calls us to that in Advent. A new beginning, a new start, fresh again. Stand up and lift up your heads is the invitation. But there's an urgency here that we can't fail to miss. Jesus says to those who hear this for the first time, he says, be careful. Did you catch that in the reading? Be careful. Because you could miss this. And he gives this beautiful picture of how it is that we can miss it. He said, be careful that your heart is weighed down. And then he lists 3 things that can happen to us that would cause us to miss these things that God is about to do, that God is doing. The first one he says is dissipation, the heart's dissipation. Dissipate. I even looked that word up to make sure what it meant. Dissipation. It's like a fog. When it dissipates, it sort of disappears. It goes out of sight. The heart is the seat of emotion. And a heart that dissipates is a heart that loses its ability and its call to love. And so he says, be careful. Be careful. The end of the world, we know, is a time when love will grow cold. The heart will grow cold. Don't let your heart grow cold. Don't let the world so work upon you, and don't let life so cripple you that you fail to love. The dissipation of the heart. Be careful, Jesus says. Be careful, he says, because the anxieties of the drunkenness is the second thing it says. Drunkenness. What is that? That's when we numb ourselves. That's when we refuse to live. It's when we fail to take responsibility. It's when we're no longer feel like we're able to make it through the day, through the hour, through the month. And so we numb ourselves with drugs and with alcohol. We deny the life that has been given to us. And the third thing that Jesus says is the anxieties of life. Be careful, Jesus says. The anxieties of life. That we so live, that we're so self-absorbed. That's not life. That's not the way God made us to live. God didn't make us to live self-absorbed so that the anxieties and the worries and the difficulties, all of that just makes us shrivel up into a little thing all by ourselves without connection. For God did not create us to live like that. God created us for life. He created us for big life, for life outside our own little life. I love that hymn of Luther's where he says, let good and kindreds go, this mortal life also. Yeah, those are words of someone who understands that life is meant to be lived in God. And that means it's big. It means we're able to turn away from those anxieties, those little things that tear us apart, that make us worry all the time, and to come into the larger life, the bigger life that God has created us for. So Jesus says, be careful. You can miss it. These things, he says, are a trap. Be careful. So we are called today in this little apocalypse, stand up. Don't lie down. Don't give up. Don't say, this is all hopeless. Don't say, I can't do anything. I'm completely defeated. Don't say that. You're in God's hands. How can you say that? Stand up. Stand up wherever you are and whatever you face and whatever challenges are in your life. Because you're standing in the power and the presence of God, we can stand up. All of us can. And lift up your heads. Your redemption is coming near. This little apocalypse not only gives us a picture of Jesus coming in a cloud with great power, out there, up there, for the whole earth to see, but this gift, he says, this redemption is coming near. Jesus wants to take our hand, our very hand, and lead us into whatever next step we're supposed to go. Jesus wants to mend and heal every broken piece of our hearts, every disappointment. Jesus wants to wipe away every tear of our life. Jesus wants to heal and bless and strengthen us. Our redemption is drawing near, and when it draws near, we are made strong and whole, and we are able to live. We can raise, we can stand, we can receive all of these gifts. Advent makes us awake to that and aware of that. The great power of God, the power of God that we see in the coming of Christ at the end of time in power and great glory is near for us to take us and strengthen us and bless us and renew us. But Advent says, don't wait. Don't wait. Now, this moment, that's the Advent call. This moment, this time, right now. Will Willimon is a scholar, preacher, writer. He's Methodist. He's now back at Duke Divinity School where he's taught and worked for most of his life. He's always listed in the 12 great preachers. You know, they come up with these lists. I told you one time, I'm 13. They got the 12. You know, I've heard Will Willimon preach a number of times. He's okay. He's all right. But what I really like about him is his writing. He shares a story about when he was a young graduate student, married, working on his doctorate at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, serving a little country church, a little Methodist church, probably about the size of this one. And one of the church members had a death in her family. And the funeral was in this kind of independent church out in the country, even further out in the country. And he and his wife decided to go to be supportive of the family who had lost a loved one. He got to the church and it was hot. Georgia, hot summer day. The church was crowded with people. They brought the coffin in down to the front, and the preacher, who I'm sure hadn't gone to Duke Divinity School, probably had not even gone to college. I remember my grandmother, she used to beg me. She said, Tommy, don't ever get a doctor's degree because you'll never be able to preach again. And so this country preacher, he may have had a high school education, probably not. He was one of those country preachers. Maybe you've met a few like that. Well, they brought the coffin in, and the country preacher gets up, and he starts flailing his arms, and he starts shouting out to the people, Joe is dead. Joe might have wanted to make something of his life, but it's too late for Joe. Joe is dead. And he goes on like this for about 30 minutes. After the service is over, Willimon gets in the car with his wife, and he's thinking, boy, that was a lot of help to the family. He says to his wife as they're driving back to Atlanta, he says, you know, That was probably the worst thing I've ever heard in my whole life. His telling the people that they got to, fix their life right now because Joe's dead and they may die tomorrow and all this kind of stuff. That was the most tasteless, the worst, the most awesome, gosh-awful thing I've ever heard in my life. And his wife said, I agree. It was tacky. It was tasteless. It was awful. And then she paused and said, and the worst part of it is that it's true. Today, now, this first Sunday of Advent, new beginning for you. Seize it now, today. God's call in your life for a new beginning. To love like you've never loved before and start it today. To forgive like you've never forgiven and start it today. To pray like you've never prayed before and start it today. To give of your resources and the goodness of your life like you've never given before and start it today. Right now. New beginning. Advent. Today. Don't miss it. It's beautiful.